Hello and welcome to How Not to Play Wilds of Eldraine's Mechanics and Draft Archetype Overview. So what we're going to be doing here today is going through all of the different mechanics coming up in Wilds of Eldraine, along with what the 10 different draft archetypes are for the set, and what to look for, what they care about, and kind of some pointers on how to go about drafting them for Wilds of Eldraine. So the first of 10 draft archetypes is an easy one, a common one that we all know and love. It is Big Things. So Gruul, red-green, is going for the Red Riding Hood theme of getting big things on the board. You get your big bad wolf, and you go to town. Yes, each draft archetype in Wilds of Eldraine has a specific fairy tale themed with it. So here we see Ruby, or Red Riding Hood, coming down on 2, giving you mana. She does have haste, so you can use that mana immediately. And if you have big things out, like Howling Galefang, then she gets an extra +2/+2, and is able to swing in for more damage. And so that is the basic Gruul stompy mid-range beatdown plan for the Wilds of Eldraine. So yep, pretty easy, pretty cut and dry. You put things down, you turn them sideways, you win the game. Or in the case of Howling Galefang, I guess he doesn't really turn sideways because he has vigilance. And if you have an adventure card in exile, he has haste as well. Wait, what's an adventure card, you say? Well, adventure is a returning mechanic to Wilds of Eldraine. If you are familiar with Throne of Eldraine, this mechanic was featured there as well. Basically, a card has a split bottom. In every other zone in the game, in your deck, in your hand, in the graveyard, in exile, it is a creature. This one is a wolf. Whatever that middle bar says is what that card is everywhere other than on the stack. When you cast it, you may cast it for its adventure cost, which for this one, Bakery Raid is its adventure. As a sorcerer, you can pay 1 green, go on a bakery raid, and create a food token. Yes, food tokens are in Wilds of Eldraine again, just like they were in Throne of Eldraine. Your basic food token, pay 2, sack it, gain 3 life. Nothing really new there. We've seen that in pretty much every set since Throne of Eldraine. So if you're not familiar with that, crawl out under your rock. Come join us at the table. But with the adventure mechanic, so on turn 1 or whenever, for 1 green, you can play this as a sorcery, create your food token, and then Hollow Scavenger will go to exile. It will go on an adventure. So the adventure zone is just a special exile term, meaning that at any point, whenever it could normally be cast, you can then cast Hollow Scavenger as its base card, as the creature wolf. So turn 1, you can put it in exile, get your food token. Turn 3, you can cast it for full value, bring it on the battlefield as a 3/2. If you still have that food around, you can sack it to Hollow Scavenger to make it a 5/4 to trigger your Big Things Matter for Gruul. So it really works well with the archetype. And so we will be seeing adventure cards all throughout Wilds of Eldraine, and all of them are pretty powerful. So be sure to look for those in your draft to help augment your deck in whatever colors you are. Our second archetype is White-Black. This is the Snow White theme, and it is based around enchantments. So Neva, Stalked by Nightmares, is your Snow White. When she enters the battlefield, you can return a creature or enchantment from your graveyard to hand. Whenever an enchantment is put into the graveyard, she gets a +1/+1 counter, and you get to scry. So this is a very heavy enchantment build. So you're going to be looking for other things that synergize with enchantments, like your Slumbering Keep Guard. Whenever enchantment enters the battlefield, scry, he gains +1 for each enchantment you control. I mean, that can make him really, really big and a really good attacker. And so you're going to want to look for those creatures and effects that synergize with enchantments. Also, you're going to want to look for enchantments, which kind of brings us into our next new mechanic for Wilds of Eldraine. You will find different cards in Wilds of Eldraine, such as Not Dead After All, that has their effect or is a creature or whatever, and then it creates a role token attached to a creature. There are 6 different roles that these cards can produce, and we'll go over them all here, but the cards that produce them should tell you what they do, so you shouldn't have to memorize all of these. So for example, Not Dead After All brings something back from the graveyard, puts a Wicked Roll token onto it. This token is an enchantment, so it goes along with the white-black enchantment themes. And basically, they all have different abilities. The Wicked Roll gives a creature +1/+1 whenever the token enchantment is put into the graveyard from the battlefield. Either it's destroyed, removed, or the creature dies, then each opponent loses 1 life. To note, you can only have 1 roll attached to 1 creature at a time. So if your creature already has the Wicked Roll and you decide to put a different roll on it, say the Cursed Roll, then that Wicked Roll goes to the graveyard and its ability would trigger. Your opponent can have a different roll on the same creature, so it is possible for 1 creature to have 2 rolls, 1 controlled by you, 1 controlled by your opponent, but 1 player can only control 1 roll attached to 1 creature. You can have multiple creatures with the Wicked Roll or the Cursed Roll or any of the other rolls that we see coming up, but each creature can only have 1 roll. Clear as mud. Let's look over the rest of them. So like I said, we have the Wicked Roll, we also have the Cursed Roll. Enchanted creature has base power and toughness 1/1. If you're familiar with Hocus Pocus, you just turn them into a mouse. Or a frog. Or whatever else you want to call it, because they are now just a 1/1 critter. They still have any abilities that the creature had. So if they have this creature gains +1 for each enchantment you control, it would still have that ability. It would just have base power and toughness 1/1. Our third role is the royal role. So each fairy tale has like a king or a queen, and your royal creature will gain +1/+1 and ward 1. So it'll cost 1 more to target them for your opponent. Aside from that, each story has a young hero. For magic purposes, this enchanted creature, whenever it attacks, if it has 3 or less toughness, it gets a +1/+1 counter. Those counters will stay even if this roll is removed, and it only cares about toughness. So if your creature is a 3/1, let's say, and it attacks, it'll get a +1 counter and become a 4/2. If your creature is under the Cursed Roll and has base power and toughness 1/1, and then you put the young hero roll on it, so it's essentially a cursed young hero, it is a 1/1, which means that it will get the +1/+1 counters, even if its base stats are, normally like a 4/6 or something. And then once you uncurse it, then it will still have the +1 counters from the young hero and be like, a 5, 7, 6, 8, something really huge and hard to deal with. So definitely look for some of these byplay interactions while you're playing your game. Rolls can be a little tricky to maneuver, but you'll get the hang of them in time. There are 2 more rolls. The monster roll, because each fairy tale has a big bad monster, and in Magic that means that it gains +1/+1 and trample. And usually most fairy tales have some kind of sorcerer, fairy, magic user, or whatever to help your young hero out. And to help us out, we have a +1/+1, and whenever it attacks, scry 1 for the sorcerer role. So those are all 6 roles for Wilds of Eldraine. Like I said, most cards will tell you what the role is when they create the token, and so you don't have to memorize them all. These reminder cards will be in packs as you open them, so there should be some on the table if you need the reminder. But anyway, let's move on to our next archetype, which is white-green. This is based around Beauty and the Beast. This focuses mostly around the roles mechanic. So not just enchantments, but roles in specific. So, for example, when Sir Armont, our belle of the story, enters the battlefield, you create a monster role token attached to a creature. And so that becomes the beast. And then Sir Armont acts as a lord for your enchanted creatures. So anything with an enchantment automatically gets a +1/+1. So if you put the monster role on Besotted Knight, then it's a 4/4, but the monster role gives it a 5/5 and trample, and so it just can be really, really big. Once again, we see adventures coming in to help this archetype as well. For 1 white, you can create a royal role attached to a creature you control. So Sir Armont could be your royal role from the Besotted Knight, and then it would get +1 from the royal role, and then give itself a +1 for being enchanted. So definitely look at those byplays with the roles in the Beauty and the Beast or the Selesnya archetype. Moving on to Simic, we have Jack and the Beanstalk. So here we have our Vidalkin Troyan going through the Omen Paths into Wilds of Eldraine, ramping up the Beanstalk and finding, well, giants. Huge creatures, huge mana casting cost creatures. This one cares about casting spells with 5 mana or more. So with Troyan, he will actually help ramp you into those. So if you can find a turn 1 ramp spell, you can pop Troyan on 2, then play your land on turn 3, plus Troyan can get you 5 mana to pump out a Beanstalk Worm on turn 3. And so that's the basic game plan. Ramp into big stuff. Pretty much the same thing as Gruul, except more ramp. Moving on to black-green, the Golgari archetype, we see ourselves in Hansel and Gretel. Here we have Greta's Sweet Tooth Scourge. Enters the battlefield, create a food token, and then different food synergies. And yes, in Eldraine, the food bites back. So here we have the Minstrosity. Whenever it dies, create a food token. It is a horrible candy cane that you do not want coming after you. And so that's the basic byplay in black-green. Create foods, use those foods to do different things, to pump up your creatures via different abilities. And, I mean, we've seen this archetype before. It's pretty self-explanatory at this point. Not really a whole lot more to say. You can use those food tokens to gain life if you need to, or to, in Greta's case, pump up creatures, draw cards, whatever it is you need to do. Just look for those food synergies and those food payouts if you find yourself going into black-green. In Azorius, we find ourselves in the Snow Queen fable. You might recognize a lot of these themes from the Disney movie Frozen. It's essentially based off of the same myth. The general premise behind white-blue in Wilds of Eldraine is to tap down your opponent's creatures and or utilize stun counters. So whenever Charade of Numbing Depths enters the battlefield, tap a creature, put a stun counter on it, freeze in place, tap a creature, put stun counters on it, and then look for these tap payouts. So whenever one or more creatures whenever you tap one or more of your opponent's creatures, draw a card. Different things like that. Charade isn't the only one that has a tap payout. Look for those. Look for different ways to tap down your opponent's creatures, and you will make yourself as annoying as possible to your draft table, and they will probably kick you out next week. But it is still a good method of victory. Our next archetype is blue-black fairies, going into the Sleeping Beauty tail. Because it's fairies, there's a lot of flash, there's a lot of flying, so you're going to want to look for those synergies. You are going to have generally smaller creatures, but they will be very evasive. Look for different fairy mechanics, or fairy tribals, such as, whenever another fairy enters the battlefield, blah, blah, blah. Stingblade Assassin is another very good fairy to look for. It's a post-combat trick. Whenever it enters the battlefield, destroy something that an opponent was dealt damage by. So just look for a lot of those fairies matters mechanics, and just load your deck with as many as you can find if you find yourself going blue-black. For white-red or Boros, we find ourselves at Cinderella's Ball, where we encounter the next new mechanic in Wilds of Eldraine, Celebration. We've seen mechanics like this before. Whenever 2 or more non-land permanents enter the battlefield, something happens. You celebrate. So that sounds pretty hard to cast 2 spells per turn. But you have to remember that in Wilds there are these role tokens that you can create through cards like Merry Bards. So when it enters the battlefield, you can create a young role token attached to a creature. So you get the Bard entering play as 1 non-land permanent, and then you get the enchantment token entering play as a 2nd non-land permanent. And right there with 1 card, your celebration triggers. So it sounds hard on paper, but in practice it should be fairly easy to trigger your celebration every turn. And that's what you're going to want to look for in Boros, is these celebration cards that reward you for playing 2 or more permanents, and cards with the roll mechanic to help you land 2 or more permanents each turn. Our next archetype is Sorcerer's Apprentice, blue-red spells. This is an archetype we have seen multiple times. It is kind of a staple in any draft. You look for spell payouts, and then you look for spells. So with Johann, Apprentice Sorcerer, you can look at the top card. If it's an instant or sorcerer, you can cast it from the top of your library. Different cards like Aquatic Alchemist, whenever you cast your first sorcery or instant, it gains +2/+0 until end of turn. So you look for these different spells payouts. Of note, if the top card of your library has Adventure, you can cast the Adventure spell this way. So feel free to stack as many cards like Aquatic Alchemist into your deck as you want, because you can cast it for the Adventure and then turn right around and cast the creature out of Adventure and just go to town. But generally, you're going to want to stock your deck with a whole bunch of instant sorceries so that you can keep firing off counter spells, burn spells, pumping up your creatures, and just swinging in for lethal. Our next and final archetype is Rakdos. This is focusing on the Pied Piper story and focuses on Rats Tribal. Oddly enough, there's not a lot of actual rat creatures in the deck. Mostly it'll be an ability that lets you create rat tokens. These are 1/1 black rats that cannot block, much like the mites in Phyrexia. But the Piper does give your rats the ability to get Death Touch till end of turn, so they are going to be very lethal attackers. And so basically you're just going to want to swarm the board with rat tokens, swing on in, and hopefully do enough damage to knock your opponent out. And with all of these rat tokens that you're going to be producing, it is important to note the last new mechanic in Wilds of Eldraine, the bargain mechanic. So if a card has bargain on it, that means that when you cast it, you may also sacrifice an artifact, an enchantment, or a token to power the spell up. So that could be any artifact, any enchantment, including your token enchantments from the roll mechanic, or any token creatures that you may have, such as the rats from the Swarm Piper. If these spells are bargained, then they'll generally do something else, or something more powerful, such as with Rowan's Grim Search. Generally, if you just cast a spell for 3, you're going to draw 2 cards, lose 2 life. But if you bargain it, then you can look at the top 4 cards, put 2 of them back on top, and those will be the 2 cards that you draw. So it gives you a little bit of an extra power and extra choice. And there's all different kinds of bargain cards in the set that do everything from bounce creatures, pump your creatures, remove creatures, anything, you name it, it'll be in there. Look for those bargain cards, but also look for the tokens and enchantments or token enchantments that you can use to bargain with. And that covers all 10 draft archetypes, all the new and returning mechanics in Wilds of Eldraine to help prepare you for your Wilds of Eldraine draft. So please go down to your local game store, sign up for your drafts, get in. This looks to be a really fun set. A lot of really powerful interactions, mechanics. I look forward to seeing how the rolls byplay and bounce off of each other. How the bargain mechanic will help power up your spells. It looks to be really fun and interactive. So please go on, support your local game stores, get into your draft, play with some of these cool cards, and let me know in the comments below, what's your favorite draft archetype? Which one has you the most excited? And while you're down there, go ahead, hit that like button, subscribe to this channel for more content, and I will see you in the next video.